Wellness Wednesday webinar. Today we're going to be talking about redefining what it means to work in the legal profession. And our presenters, I'd like to introduce to you, we have Dorothy Black, who's of counsel with Jackson Lewis, along with Lauren Presser, who's an associate with Jackson Lewis. Lauren, Dorothy, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Dorothy. Thank you so much for that introduction. As mentioned by Kyle, I've been working for Jackson Lewis for quite some time now. Been practicing exclusively in employment law in California for 23 years now, and I really enjoy doing these programs. Love the aspect of teaching, so I'm really excited to be presenting, particularly on this topic of well-being in the law. So I turn it over to Lauren as well for her to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren Presser. I'm an associate, obviously, with Jackson Lewis. I've been practicing in California law, in employment and class actions, and all a number of things, like litigation, advice counsel, what have you, for about 10 years now. And we're happy, and we think it's honestly timely, given the current events, to talk about well-being in law and kind of learning to cope with the stress that may come with our profession or is inherent in our profession, and also just in the world right now. So we're happy to present this with you. Give me 1 second. So let's kick it off. So we're going to be discussing well-being in law, talking about what it means to be working in the legal profession and coping with the stress that is inherent in our profession and is inherent in our world, especially right now. The cover is basically our roadmap for today. We're going to go over some more recent studies about lawyer well-being and what's inherent in our profession. The stress that's being caused in your personal life, in your professional life, in the current international climate, how stress can really impact your competence and why that's important in the profession, why lawyers in particular are prone to stress-induced diseases, and some strategies to help you with setting boundaries or improving your well-being. So we'll begin with a recent study that was done on well-being in the law, where unsurprisingly, regardless of what area you may be practicing in, a lot of lawyers experience anxiety and stress, in addition to depression and substance abuse. So I think it's not surprising for any of us. The numbers are quite high. Around 71% of lawyers report anxiety, 38% of lawyers report depression, or know a colleague who is depressed. That's even higher, 63%. 49% of lawyers believe that mental health problems and substance abuse are at a crisis level for our industry, and 15% of lawyers have contemplated suicide at some point. That's not surprising, considering, especially in California, that we have to go over CLEs, which hopefully the credit for this is pending, where we have to do substance abuse CLEs, mental health CLEs, anything of that nature. I think that's pretty indicative of the challenges in our profession. That's noticeably higher for people of color, for minorities, whether it's somebody who's part of the LGBTQ plus community, somebody who is African American, Latinos, women. The numbers are substantially higher if you're part of a minority group. And 76% of lawyers thought that their work environment contributed negatively to their mental health issues. Again, I think this is not that surprising for a lot of us in the legal field.
Another interesting aspect of the study indicated that while only 20% of the mid-level associates indicated that they would consider leaving their firm for higher compensation, while 60% said that they would consider leaving their firm for better work-life balance, right? Which is a little counterintuitive than what you would think. And then individuals who were dealing with added burdens and stressors, like those from underrepresented and historically excluded populations, parents and other caregivers, have yet another layer of demands on their time and availability on top of those pressures to be responsive and always on call to their practice. So, those individuals, reported, an additional layer of pressure and anxiety in addition to those reported by lawyers without those additional societal pressures. So that's a very interesting study indeed.
And that's also, I guess, unsurprising to anybody who's already a parent, where you have additional pressure in your life to be there for your family, or to be taking care of your children, or to be already probably struggling to maintain a healthy work-life balance. The necessities or the pressure you may feel in practicing law, regardless if you're in a law firm or if you're acting as corporate counsel, there's a lot of pressure to always be on and to always be perfect and to always make yourself available, which doesn't necessarily help with the other pressures that you would feel regardless of what job you're in. So, and again, unsurprisingly, a new report came out highlighting, based on lawyers in California and DC, that lawyers are twice as likely as the general population to experience suicidal thoughts. And lawyers who reported high stress levels were 22 times more likely to experience thoughts of suicide than lawyers with low stress. So it's not only that our profession in general is a stressful one. We already all know that. We've been in it long enough. It's also that our coping strategies when it comes to stress, or when it comes to the stressors that we're experiencing in our job, can actually have a huge impact on your mental health overall. And that's just the psychological effects of your ability to cope with stress.
And in addition to the study, the lawyers that they analyzed and researched in California and DC, they found that the lawyers were twice as likely as a general population to experience suicidal thoughts. And the lawyers who reported high stress levels were 22 times more likely to experience thoughts of suicide than lawyers with low stress. And here's a quote: junior associates, young attorneys, and attorneys working more than 60 hours per week were particularly at risk. And suicidal ideation was more common among racial and ethnic minorities than among white attorneys. And then also an interesting part of the study that really bucked a broader societal trend was that men in the legal profession were slightly more likely to experience suicidal ideation than women. Again, just, very interesting a part of the study. And then also in terms of some researching highlighting the fact that lawyers with the best mental and physical health and lowest risk of attrition work in environments that make them feel most valued for their skill, talent, and professionalism, or inherent worth as a human being, as opposed to environments that made them feel valued primarily for, revenue generation or their financial contribution to the firm. So again, just because you're bringing in money and you're financially viable, those were not the most important factors in reducing stress for individuals in firm life.
Exactly. And also I think it's worth pointing out that means for your institution in general, and if you're supervising anyone, making them feel valued as a human being goes more than just being a good person or just being normal. It goes towards, one, keeping your people, and two, making them mentally better, making their mental health substantially better. If you have an environment where you're making your employees feel valued, you make them feel valued for their skills, for their actual personality, you contribute to their overall health, and they're more likely to stay. And we'll go over that a little bit more in a little bit. But just noticing someone's contributions, just saying, oh, you did really good on this specific job, that's not necessarily going to keep your people. So from both a personal perspective, a humanitarian perspective, and as an institutional perspective, it's worthwhile to be a good human essentially, and to be helping the people around you with their mental health and be helping them with their coping strategies when it comes to stress. They also found that overcommitment and permissiveness towards alcohol at work was associated with the highest likelihood of stress and risky drinking. That was relative to all other predictors of negative mental health outcomes for both men and women. And it's really interesting also, they found that generally men in the legal profession were more likely to face suicidal tendencies or suicidal thoughts than women in the profession. And again, that might have a lot to do with coping trends or coping mechanisms when it comes to the stress in your life or any negative things you may be experiencing. Because, you know, again, as lawyers, we're expected to be perfect at all times. We're expected to be accessible at all times. We're expected to be committed to a degree that's a bit different than a lot of other professions. Again, this is a little bit of a less recent study as compared to the 2023 study that we just went over. But again, this is probably not that surprising to anybody. Substance abuse and psychological disorders are quite high in this profession, with 21 to 36%, as you can see, which qualify as problem drinkers. I mean, if you've ever gone to a single legal event, I honestly can't remember a single one that didn't have a lot of alcohol. And you know, while that can be fun and it can be really social, it's also something that can contribute to issues in general when that's used as a coping mechanism for stress. I'll let Dorothy take over. You know, again, anxiety disorders, depression.
Yeah, 28% have depression, and these are just reported numbers, right? And people who are actually seeking treatment. So these numbers could very well be higher. 19% reporting having an anxiety disorder. Men have higher proportion of positive screens. Again, that might very well be because of their, you know, less likely to be reporting, less likely to seek treatment, you know, a variety of societal reasons. We also have attorneys in private firms experiencing the highest rates of problem drinking and depression, and then 23% reporting having some sort of stress disorder.
Yeah, and jumping off Dorothy's point, I mean, these are self-reported numbers, which you got to understand as part of a polling mechanism. That means that people that are, one, aware that they have some kind of issue, and two, that are actually comfortable with actually telling a third party, yeah, okay, I do experience anxiety. Yes, I do experience depression. I do maybe have a problem with alcohol. But again, kind of, if you think back to when we were doing our good moral character exam for the bar, they asked at that point, do you have any mental health disorders? Do you have any substance abuse disorders? Requiring you or asking you to self-report. And it's not necessarily something that is well accepted in our industry. I think alcohol abuse in general, or substance abuse in general, or having a mental health issue, we all kind of understand to a certain extent that it exists, especially because we're required to take CLEs on it and we undergo presentations on it all the time. However, talking about it or admitting that you have some kind of disorder is still highly stigmatized in many ways. So asking people to self-report that they are experiencing these issues is likely a lot more difficult to attain realistic numbers.
Agreed.
And that's obviously, given the current climate, whether it is the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, which obviously is causing a lot of stress at this point, whether it's the conflict going on in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, whether it's international tensions that are constantly going on, quite frankly, everywhere. But especially right now, I think the past week, focusing on the tensions that are happening because of the situation in the Middle East, that is causing quite a bit of stress. I know on a personal side, there are people that, for example, are coworkers that we work with, or friends and family that we have that are personally impacted by this. So not just seeing it on the news, not just constantly facing social media, showing horrific images or talking about things, or just a constant barrage of news, but people who have loved ones that are in this area, or people who have family ties to the area all around. And that's causing a lot of stress on top of our already substantial work stress. And that comes up, you know, not just in your personal life, and not just when you're on your phone or watching TV. That comes up when you're talking to your coworkers, when you're talking to your boss, if you're on the phone with somebody. I mean, it's a lot. You know, political conflict and change are normal features of life, but in times of heightened tension and polarization within a country or between countries, that can cause widespread anxiety on a level that is extremely different and extremely stressful. You know, conflict between countries, when it escalates to threats of actual or armed conflict, can be even more disturbing. It raises the threat of immediate danger and loss of life. And if you have someone that is in that area, or if you have family ties in that area, if you are taking care of children, if you're a parent or a caregiver, and your kids are constantly seeing this barrage of news and you're not quite sure what to do about it, if your coworkers are talking about it, if you're experiencing secondhand trauma because of something that you experienced in your own life, and this is kind of bringing back that trauma that you've already experienced, this can really cause a deep emotional conflict that can make the stress that is already inherent in this profession substantially worse. So, you know, compounding that is our constant access to the news through smartphones and other technology. This is amplified by social media. It can feel a lot of times like there's no escape. So even if you do have personal ties, it can feel like there's no escape from the disturbing headlines or footage. And you can have conflict in your life where you feel like, on one hand, you feel like you should pay attention and you should be on top of it and stay in the know. And on the other hand, you feel like you're overwhelmed and you just can't handle it anymore. And you have an urge to hide or retreat. And some of that's a natural physical response to trauma. If you've been in danger, you've had loved ones that are in danger, that can cause traumatic stress. So that can include mental or physical factors. That can include irritability or anger, mood swings, lack of motivation, trouble concentrating, emotional numbness. You can feel disconnected or hopeless. You can feel fear and confusion, headaches, nausea, loss of appetite, difficulty sleeping, or obsessive thoughts about your experiences. So it can arise in both psychological and physiological senses. And it's important not only to understand and recognize those responses in yourself, but to understand and recognize those responses in the people around you, including even your coworkers, your friends, anybody in your circle of people you care about, people you interact with on a daily basis. So in talking traumatic stress, that can be caused by national or international tension. You know, like we went over, there's heightened polarization. If you have loved ones in the zone of conflict, if you have secondary trauma, just because of the things that you're seeing on a regular basis, feeling unsupported. If you feel a certain way about what's going on, or you're experiencing trauma in a certain way, but you feel like those views aren't supported, or you feel like nobody's talking about, or people in positions of authority, or only addressing one side of a conflict, that can lead to increased feelings of isolation or alienation, feeling like your life isn't valued, or people of your background's lives aren't valued. And the constant media coverage obviously does not help. Let's talk about, on a little bit of a different note, the mind of a lawyer. You know, why do we become like this? For lack of a better term, why are we like this? And to really understand why stress and why anxiety and depression are so problematic, and it's something that needs to be addressed. Let's talk about why we need to actually address them. What factors do we have in our profession that we need to actually be embodying?
And that's because we need this well-functioning, executive brain with a capacity to make good decisions, right? And evaluate risks, plan and prioritize, and cope with new situations, right? That's the mind of a lawyer. And in order to have that, you have to have a mind without stress. But a mind under stress, right? A mind that's impaired has difficulty doing these things: evaluating risks, planning, prioritizing, coping with new situations, right? An impaired mind is going to have problems remembering, right? It's going to be having problems with memory, having problems, creating or dealing with creative solutions to a problem, right? It's going to impact their problem-solving abilities, or processing language, concentrating. The ability to learn is going to be impacted. We become emotionally reactive, right? As opposed to dealing with issues in a thoughtful, non-reactive way, right? That's when our minds become impacted by stress, they become impaired. And it really affects the core features of that competent lawyer brain. And that's why, when someone is suffering from major depression or anxiety, it really, it's associated with decreased memory, attention, and problem solving. It impairs our ability to make good decisions, evaluate the risks involved in making particular, strategic decisions in our cases, right? Or plans for future development of defense strategy, or if you're on the other side, right, of the case, planning for your development of your case strategy, prioritizing and sequence actions, and then coping with new situations that might develop as your case goes along. And then some other type of cognitive impairment persists in up to 60% of individuals with depression, even after mood symptoms have diminished, making prevention strategies essential. And so again, a mind under stress is a mind that is going to be impaired in some respect. And that's why we have to be cognizant of the fact that when we are suffering from depression or anxiety or stress, that we do have those coping mechanisms so that we are able to overcome those impairments, so that we can set those impairments aside and say, okay, look, I've become deficient in my problem solving skills, but how can I set that aside, right? How can I deal with this? How can I cope so that I can make good problem solving decisions moving forward, right? For the benefit of myself and for my client and for the business, right? For the firm, or for my own for my own firm, right? It doesn't have to be the company, it can be my own practice, right? So that it doesn't become an issue down the line.
Agreed. And that, I think, it makes sense if you actually think about it. I think we're all kind of trained to a certain degree to ignore the stress in our life and just be like, okay, just shove it down. You just got to do what you got to do and just get out whatever you got to do. So if I'm reviewing a contract, if I'm helping someone through a risk on our front, in our experience, so if I'm helping a client with a reduction in force, if we're thinking about strategically, how are we going to go about things? If we're talking about, honestly, even in my experience, mergers and acquisitions, we're talking about strategy, how we're going to do things, what bases we have to cover, what we have to be aware of. If we're talking about potentially a situation where we are terminating the employment or offering employment to an employee, where we just have to keep some things in mind. If your brain is impaired, if your memory is impaired, if your problem-solving ability is impaired, that is a problem. That is a problem. You're not as good as you should be, and you're not as good as you could be. So that's why, just on a common sense level, it makes sense just for your professional development and for your client, for your company, to really be keeping this in mind. Because as much as we're encouraged to just kind of shove it down and just do what you got to do, that doesn't mean that you're actually going to be good at it, or be as good as you could be, you know. And also just for your own personal life, do you really want to be stressed out all the time? I don't think any of us do. So you know, you're not a fun person to be around. You're not as good at your job. It's just overall common sense. It makes sense to have better coping strategies for what we're going to be encountering all the time anyways. And that was the psychological impacts and the physiological impacts, the physical impacts of chronic stress. You know, obviously we're talking about stress is inherent in this profession. But if we're talking about the physical effects of stress, especially if you're trying to just shove it down and pretend like you're not stressed and just get through this week. And I think it's like, we've all seen this meme, I think, where it's like, I just got to get through today. I just got to get through this week. And then you say that every single week for years, and then you realize that you're just in a profession that's just stressful like this. So it's important to keep these in mind. So yeah, like chronic stress, as it says, you'll get headaches, hypertension, heart disease, digestive disorders, susceptibility to infection. A lot of times when you try to shove things down and you try to deal with stress in a way, and I think Dorothy and I talked about this yesterday, is if you're trying to deal with stress in a way where you're trying not to stress out your whole team, you're trying not to lose your temper, kind of like what we were talking about on the prior slide, where stress can lead to emotional outbursts, stress can lead to emotional reactivity or memory loss or cognitive dysfunction. You know, if you're trying not to exhibit it in those ways instead of coping with the stress to begin with, then it tends to come out in other ways because your body's really stubborn like that. So for my own personal example, when I was taking the bar exam, I actually had kidney stones during the actual exam. And I think I was maybe 27 at the time, 28, I don't really know anymore. But you know, that's not normal. That's like a direct example of stress and the long-term effects of stress on your body because you're just refusing to acknowledge it or cope with it on an emotional level, on a normal, healthy level. So it exhibits itself in your own way. And my own experience, I think I was in the hospital like 2 days before the exam, and they're trying to give me pain medication because they hadn't figured out what it was yet. And I was just getting severe abdominal pain, like somebody was stabbing me. But, you know, I was taking the bar exam in 2 days. I do not have time. Or so I told myself, I do not have time for this. I do not have time. I'm not wasting the past 3 months of hard work on not taking this exam. We just have to get through this. We just have to get through these few days, and then I'll figure out what the hell's going on. Eventually figured out it was kidney stones. Turns out I was passing a kidney stone while passing the bar exam. Thank God I actually passed it, because I don't ever want to experience that again. But yeah, I mean, there's a reason why, for example, I know at least when I took the bar, there were ambulances waiting outside because people will suffer physical effects from the stress that they are under, whether it's, you know, a mental breakdown, whether it's a physical breakdown. This is something you have to learn how to handle, and you have to learn how to handle in a healthy way.
I remember my first time And this was more like just being anxious my first time being in court and arguing my first motion. I was a baby lawyer, and I remember having to hold on to the podium, and because I was shaking so bad, and I'm like, I just wonder if people can see me, you know. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna like tip over. So I was just like holding to the podium for dear life because I thought, oh, I'm so nervous. But then, you know, once I got into my groove, you know, everything was fine. You know, I had prepared, and you know, I was ready for oral argument. But you know, the first, you know, 5 minutes I was up there, I thought, oh my gosh, I will literally pass out if I don't stop shaking. So yeah, stress and anxiety definitely comes out, you know, in a physical manifestation if you let it.
It really does. It really does. And I think that, you know, for litigators, I know at least every single person has at least one story where they're stressed, like they're in trial and they haven't been able to eat for 4 days.
Yeah.
They're having their first hearing and they're shaking so bad. I had a junior associate that I was talking through to prepare for their first hearing, and they just, in anticipation of it, started shaking. Or I've worked with people that are their in-house counsel, and the first time they had to give a presentation to the board of directors, just the pressure, because that is your boss at the end of the day, and giving presentations to everybody, kind of showing why you are worth the money that you're paid to a certain extent, what value you're bringing to the company, or when the company gets sued for something, particularly where it's something that you gave advice on, where you're like, okay, regulatory compliance, we are good on this. These are our problems. These are our potential areas of exposure. And you get sued, whether or not it has anything to do with what you were doing, that still is a trigger for chronic stress. You're still feeling it. And I think every single person in this field has a certain level of that, where they have at least a story where they were just, it just came out in other ways. Your emotional stress was physically exhibited. And look, why is that?
You topped mine. You topped mine with the kidney stones, but
not a competition. Please do not get kidney stones. It is terrible. Do not do that. Yeah. But you know, why are we like this? Why are we like this? Because we're perfectionists. We're drawn to this profession because we're kind of like this to begin with, probably. We tend to be, and I think this, I hope, applies to you guys a little bit less, being corporate counsel than litigators, but pessimism. You know, being in litigation, you just get very suspicious of anyone you have to deal with, because you know, people are constantly trying to strategize to harm your client, or to mess up your position, or it's a constant combative environment. So I think hopefully for us, that's a little bit worse than you guys. But you know, it causes inherent negativity bias. Law school does not help any of these things. I think before going into law school, we were probably all much more well-centered people, or at least that's what I like to think about myself. But you know, yeah.
Yeah. And then pressure, right? The pressure to add value to the organization, to be responsive, right? Even the minute you get an email, you want to respond right away, be knowledgeable about a broad range of topics, even if you don't know what in the world, you know, the response should be, you know, the pressure to advance, and just, you know, be better, to be a good corporate citizen, right? And to the extent, some extent, I think in some organizations it might be different, but to compete with others, and then get results that the leadership team expects. So I think those are all the pressures there too, and there might be you know, some additional pressures that aren't listed there as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think especially when it comes to being corporate counsel, the pressure to get the results or the answer that someone wants you to get, rather than what may actually be the most likely legal answer, is huge. It's huge, because you know, when you get sent say, a problem or a contract or review of something. I'm thinking back to my own experience when I would do advice and counsel in-house for companies, especially when I was doing it for a few international companies. They would ask me a question and say it had to do with tariffs, say it had to do with regulation compliance, say it had to do with an employment matter. Particularly when you're in-house, I think, and they're asking you something. That's your boss asking you to do something, and you know what answer they want, or you know what answer they would like you to get to. But sometimes what they would like you to get to and what the answer might actually be are two different things. And so there's a lot of pressure that is created in that kind of situation. So what's the result of all these things and why we're like this to begin with? You know, unfortunately, inflated ego, having high expectations of yourself, hyper self-criticism, hyper-criticism of other people, imposter syndrome, I think is huge, is rampant in this industry, where you feel like everything good that's ever happened to you is just luck, that you don't actually deserve to be here. And I think I've seen recent studies where imposter syndrome is substantially higher if you're a person of color, again, if you're LGBTQ, if you're a woman, if you're someone who traditionally was not a member of this field. It's a difficult thing to be facing that in your own industry on top of your own internalized conflict. You know, and for the emotional issues, you know, your patience is a lot lower when you're stressed out. You are much closer to your breaking point, whether it's in terms of snapping at somebody or just your own mental health. Your tolerance for disappointment or for mistakes is a lot lower. And you have a potential for persecution complex. I don't know, hopefully no one here has ever experienced that because it's not exactly fun. But that's essentially a complex that comes about when a person falsely believes that somebody is out there to cause them harm. So that can manifest in a few ways. That can manifest in more on the litigation side, where you feel like opposing counsel may be trying to mess with you, or maybe trying to mess with your case, and more in a well-rounded context, not just litigation, that can come about where you feel like you're about to be fired at all times, or you feel like your boss is always hating you, or is always looking at you like you're doing something wrong, even if you're doing everything in your power to be the best attorney you can be, or best corporate citizen you can be. Sometimes having a high amount of stress or having that much pressure, being a perfectionist can make you feel like you are always messing up and everyone sees you messing up. And this can spring from misinterpretations or exaggerations of real feelings and experiences. It can come about where you believe that like a supervisor is negatively critiquing your work or is watching you, even though there's a clear lack of evidence actually demonstrating that. And it can make you feel like everything is kind of an emergency or a catastrophe when it really isn't. Many things are, thankfully in our field, many things are fixable. Thank God.
Yeah, it's catastrophizing, right? Catastrophizing. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I can relate to that.
Exactly. Where you just feel like it's just a constant stream of emergencies.
Yeah. And
everything is just, oh my God, what am I going to do? Almost everything is fixable. No matter what you do, almost everything is fixable. Yep. Obviously, don't, be careful to not mess up because, that's a huge amount of pressure in our field. But, it's rarely actually an emergency. It's rarely not fixable. But I think, thankfully, I think things are a little bit easing up. But I think Dorothy can probably speak on this a little bit more. But past 3 years of COVID-related complications, whether that impacted your family personally, or whether the regulations that were going with it, or just the stress of having to work from home, working remotely for the first time, distance from people can really also have a negative impact on your well-being.
Yeah, it was interesting because this is at the time when I was moving from Jackson Lewis, Los Angeles to San Diego. So not only was I having a big life event, right, a stressful life event happening, which was moving cities, moving, having a move, which was significant in my life. And then moving, it was same employer, but moving to a different office. And then all of a sudden have this shutdown, right? And, fear of the unknown. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Is this going to impact, my job? I just moved to San Diego. So again, it was just that increased, isolation, right? I just moved, I'm not going to be able to, be with my coworkers. So definitely felt, an increased sense of that isolation, which definitely led to, feelings of depression, right? Because I wasn't, around my coworkers, around my friends, just around my close family members. So there wasn't, there was sort of that loss of control over work and life, and uncertainty about the future. And how were we going to work remotely, right? There was that pressure as well, and until we kind of balanced that out and figured out how we were going to work from home, because at that time it was all so new to us, right? We worked from home a little bit, but we didn't think we could do it all the time, 24/7. And then as time went along, there was sort of this pressure to return to the office, and then we all had become accustomed to it. So it was hard, right, to kind of transition back, and was it going to be all the time, right? So there was that, and then also, I at that time, during COVID, I broke my foot. So there was that. I stopped exercising. So again, all of those things combined, that was sort of a really trying time for me. Yeah, COVID and all of those things packed together, a life change, certainly had an impact on my mental health, and my well-being. So I'm sure everyone has their own story to tell, but that's certainly how my own personal experience with it.
Yeah, and again, if you're a person of color, if you are someone who had health concerns, if you're a member of like a few specific minority groups in particular, the past 3 years were very rough, and it could be really difficult to concentrate on work. You were exhibiting a lot of those signs of stress. You were having additional stress on top of dealing with all of these issues when it came to remote work, on dealing with your actual health. And also, I think that came about if you're a parent. If you're a parent, your divide between home and work disappeared. And then you had pressure to teach kids while you were also working, which is not anything insignificant. It was a lot of additional stress. Again, it's like playing life on expert mode, which is not easy at all. So in talking about that, let's talk about well-being. What even does well-being mean? Because we're lawyers, so we have to define everything, of course. So well-being, we define is a continuous process toward thriving across all life dimensions. What does that even mean? So it means a well-rounded approach to well-being. That means not only are your emotional and physical needs met. That means, do you have environmental security? Do you have financial security? Are you actually able to achieve your occupational pursuits? Do you feel like you're in a dead-end job? Do you have social connections? How is your social support system functioning? And do you have an outlet for your creativity? Do you have intellectual endeavors? Do you have a feeling like you're achieving some kind of greater purpose? Or do you feel like you're just kind of surviving each day? So all of those go into a well-rounded picture of your well-being, and to be the best attorney that you can be, to serve your client or serve the business that you work for, or serve whomever the best that you can. Well-being is something to achieve. It's a constant, annoying struggle to trying to be the best version of yourself. So why do we want to improve? Let's talk about it. So basically, from a purely ethical standpoint, from the ABA or from our CLE standpoint, our standing with the bar standpoint, it's important because of the rules of professional conduct. We have a specific duty to actually achieve well-being. And you can see it in the model rules of professional conduct. It calls lawyers to, quote, strive to attain the highest level of skill, to improve in the law and the legal profession, and exemplify the legal profession's ideals of public service. So that comes about 1.1 in competence, we're required to provide competent representation. 1.3 in diligence, I believe we're required to act with reasonable diligence and promptness in representing a client. It's hard to do that when you keep forgetting to, or when you are disorganized, or your strategy for doing that is not doing so well because you're having a hard time with what's going on inside. In 1.4, promptness, you have to be prompt. Hard to do that again if you're kind of freaking out on the inside, or if your stress level is so obscene that you're unable to focus. 2.1, in representing a client, a lawyer shall exercise independent professional judgment, render candid advice. So you have to include considerations such as moral, economic, social, and political factors that have to be relevant to a client situation, which means if there is an external source of internal turmoil, your client's probably also going to want you to take that into account. So you have to really have a common level head to be able to address that. And 4.1, truthfulness to third parties and clients. There's a lot of pressure to do what people want you to do rather than what is actually legally viable, rather than the answer they would like to have. So minimum competence is important for avoiding discipline to begin with.
And so many of these rules of professional conduct can be negatively impacted by alcohol consumption, drug use. If you are under the influence or suffering with any type of drug or alcohol substance abuse, you're not going to be able to provide any of these with any degree of competence to any of your clients. So always good to remember.
Yes, and here's some good news, because I know we've been very doom and gloom up until this point. So the good news is studies have come out to say that you can create new neural pathways within 90 days. If you shift the way that you're thinking about things, you can oftentimes shift your actual response. You can achieve a sense of balance that comes from wisdom. You can find fulfillment, and you can look at your life kind of like we look at things in the legal profession. Strategize. What can I do to make this better? How can I go about things, and what pathways, what activities should I be doing to make myself stronger, to make this better? So let's talk about that. So here's some strategies for attorney well-being. There's a few things. There's an acronym called LEARN, and we'll go over that in a second. So learn small steps. What does that mean? L. And I know this is going to sound cheesy. I know it is, but this is wellness and it's going to sound cheesy no matter what. So L is laughter. I don't know if they ever taught you guys this, but I learned when you're doing oral argument, or if you're on the phone, if you're in a difficult or stressful situation, smile. Because it tricks your brain into thinking that you're actually happier than you are. It helps your immune system. It releases endorphins. It's kind of a cheat code for your body. I don't know why it works, but it has been proven to work. I would defer to a psychologist or a neuroscientist on this, but if you don't take yourself too seriously, if you smile, if you look for opportunities for things that are going to make you laugh or make you smile, it does make life a little bit easier. It does make dealing with stress a little bit easier. So exercise. Difficult. Not my favorite thing in the world. But actually even just walking around the block, taking your lunch break, actually taking your lunch break and taking a walk, or making sure that you make time to exercise. I know it recommends exercise snacks. It may freak out your coworkers, but maybe like taking a 10-minute break to do some exercise in your office, do some deep stretches. it can go a long way. It releases, again, endorphins. It helps deal with stress. I am not the kind of person that can wake up early and do it. I really wish I had that in me. I personally cannot. I don't know, Dorothy, if you could speak on this, but like, I don't have that in me.
I thought exercise meant like going to get snacks. Exercise. Look, baby steps, right? So now my sister and I, we're taking walks when I get home, little things like that, just to, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, right? And they say you can create a habit if you do it for 30 days straight, and we're going to give it a shot. And so little things like that, if you can create a habit within 30 days, then it's worth a shot. And so that's what we're going to do. We lost our dog. We used to walk him all the time. We don't have that opportunity now. But if you have fur babies, take them out for a walk, and that's your form of exercise, right? There's little things that you can do. Start a walking group with a friend, meet on a Saturday and go on a hike, right? I mean, there's just little things that you can add to your day. And hopefully, I know that with our firm, we used to do like a Fitbit competition where we would do a competition for steps, right? And at the end of the summer, we would create teams, and then whoever had the most steps on the team would win a prize. And so that would motivate me to get at least as many steps as I could to try to at least not be on the losing team, right? So there's all these things that we can do as teams, as working teams that we can do, and just as individual motivation. So give it a shot.
And I think it's important to be doing that. And if you're new to a city or you don't have a social network where you are, there's also internet resources like meetup.com where you can join other people that might be interested in that.
For sure.
And just going on R for recreation. So in Learn, we're on R. Do not be the person that never takes their vacation time. Don't be that person. We all know that person, and they really could use a vacation. Have some kind of balance. Be outside more. Make sure that you're actually doing things that bring you happiness instead of just work, because you don't want to be here 30 years down the line and you don't really remember doing anything for fun. And this is the one that's harder for us.
And if you can't plan a vacation, do a weekend getaway, right?
Yeah.
Go somewhere on the weekend, get a hotel, just do something where you're away for the weekend. Yeah.
Yeah. And nutrition, I think the one that I struggle with the most, eating better. Eating, hurried or distracted eating. When you eat at your desk, it negatively impacts your mental health. Not having a bunch of alcohol consumption. Again, that is hard to generally in our industry because every single attorney event tends to include alcohol. But moderation, making sure that you're doing it in a social way, making sure you're doing it in a healthy way. And S, again, one that we all kind of struggle with, depending on how you deal with anxiety, is sleep. Like making sure and actually bookmarking for yourself that you get enough sleep consistently. I remember seeing a study of military veterans and how they had done a study on them in active combat. If they had less than 7 hours of sleep each night, they actually were mentally deficient for, I believe, like 3 weeks. And the longer that you tend to incur that bank of sleep deprivation, the harder and harder it is for you to get back. So even though you may feel like, oh, I slept in a few days later, I'm fine, you're not where you normally would be. And if you consistently keep a habit of sleep deprivation, you're just going to constantly be in the red. And another S, self-reflection. Like knowing yourself, developing tools for stress, self-care, reaching out for support, whether that's professional assistance or what have you. Meditation, not my strong suit, but it is something that does help a lot of people. And I think, again, self-reflection, like examining your actions, examining your habits and your manners of coping, and evaluating whether that actually works for you.
Ask for help. If you need it, ask for help. You would be so surprised how many people will step in and help out.
And again, kind of like Dorothy was saying, it takes 30 days to develop a new habit. So start working on them. Don't wait for a New Year's resolution. Just start actually working on them. The mindfulness, I know you can have the mindfulness app that may help with you. Actually achieving, you know, deliberate, open, curious attention. Being engaged. I know even Netflix has a mindfulness program where you can do it for sleeping, for calming your mind, but it's something to use as a tool. So again, avoid being judgmental, difficult in our profession. And I know we're getting close on time, so if you do have any questions, just put it into the chat. If we do run over, we can always ask for questions, but I don't anticipate we will run over by much, by maybe a few minutes if we do at all. So avoiding being judgmental, which can be hard in our profession because our profession encourages a little bit of judgmentalness. Listening constructively, communicating consciously, and being curious.
Yeah, and show yourself some grace. Just be kind to yourself.
Be kind to yourself. So again, managing stress in times of international conflict. Huge, especially right now. How do we do that? One, developing coping strategies, paying attention to signs of stress. And that's both in yourself and other people. So like we talked about before, increased irritability, lack of patience, emotional outbursts, changes in eating behavior, changes in sleeping. You or people that you care about, people that you're around may start to show that. If they start to show a lack of interest in things that used to bring them happiness, if they are showing a lack of interest or a lack of motivation in work, that's something to set off kind of warning bells in your mind that maybe they're not okay. But again, take care of yourself first. You can't be there for somebody if you're not okay too. And that can be the hardest thing, especially if you're a caregiver or you're a parent. I think one thing right now in particular that is huge is because of the constant social media barrage that's going on, staying informed, but set boundaries on media. So telling yourself, for example, you know, I'm going to set a timer. These are the times that I'm allowed to access social media. These are the times I'm allowed to catch up on the news, instead of just constantly being just overwhelmed by a barrage. If you want to set times that you're actually going to seek out news instead of pulling it up on social media and just having it passively fed to you, and finding reliable sources for that kind of information. You know, set times a day where you catch up and staying connected to your social group. That is huge. Make sure that you don't retreat, even when you want to. Maintaining routines, making sure that you go to bed every single time, at the same time every single day, or eating at the same time every day. Make sure that you're actually eating. That can be a huge factor in maintaining your mental health. And find ways to take positive action. So this also comes into account when you're taking care of others. So, you know, like we were saying, difficulty sleeping, nausea, loss of appetite, feelings of helplessness, emotional numbness. Notice when your friends or colleagues are also feeling it. And that can come across in different types of care. If you know that somebody is going through a hard time, if you know that somebody is personally impacted by something going on, reach out, try to give them some kind of sources where they can be supported. See if you can do something for them. Like we have this email where we talk about somebody who had a loss inside their family, or a client in the firm who had loss in their family, and making sure that they are supported as well. And you know, some things go along with that. Make sure if it's a physical situation, physical safety is important. Provide, if you can, a situation where they're physically safe. For emotional support and safety, make them feel welcome and important. Make them feel like they are heard. Be calm, actively listen rather than interjecting your own experiences. Give them space and privacy if they need it. Let them come to you in a lot of times, but keep checking in without being overly harassing. avoid simple reassurances, things like it could be worse, you're okay, and instead say things where you're empathizing. That sounds really hard. Tell me about it. Be curious, be an active listener. Help if you can with providing support or contacts that they may need. If somebody needs potentially a support system like they're talking about in the email, any resources, see if you can connect them to those resources. If they need a new job, if they need a new place to live, if they need to relocate, if you can find a way or you can connect them to somebody that might help, do it. Take the steps and do it. Offer the help. Help them regain a sense of control and give them some kind of authority over their own life, because the helplessness can often come from a feeling like you are no longer in control of your life. So, reimagining our profession, where we're good people, where we no longer have to do CLEs on competence and wellness because we're actually doing okay. Be the person that you wish you had in the legal profession when you started. Be the person that people feel like they matter to them. Be the person that people feel like they can talk to. Feeling like you matter and feeling like you're heard are huge. So being that person for that. Again, a lovely quote from Buddha: what you think, you become. What you feel, you attract. What you imagine, you create. So being that person, creating that kind of environment, and being the leader of that kind of change. That is huge. And that's really all we have control over, is your own individual actions in this front. So starting with you, making a network where somebody is supported, heard, they matter, for lack of a better term. So at this time, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'm going to plug, ironically, our Pups and Cups event, which is on November 7th. There's adoptive puppies and dogs at that event. It is at, I believe, 4 o'clock. Yeah, 4 to 7 at Second Chance Beer Company. It will be in support of rescue animals. Just take it as a therapy dog event, honestly, where you can both strengthen your social networks and use animals to increase your stress coping mechanisms. There'll be bites.
And get those steps in.
Yeah, and you'll get your steps in. Look, we're hitting all the points. But really, we want to thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to us talk about this issue, and to talk about ways that we could do a little bit better. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Otherwise, Dorothy, anything to add?
No, just thank you so much, all. We really feel strongly about this topic, and we just really appreciate you all being here with us today and sharing your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.